Thank you so much for that introduction, Neil. That's flattering. That's the biggest, it's my biggest honor. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this second day of EventTech Live. I'm going to be talking to you, with you, for the next 25 minutes about event app design and some of the things that are really important about event app design. One of the things that I want to start with is, if you walk around the show floor here, there's, I feel like, a million different event app companies. What I'm showing you can literally be applied to any supplier out here. So no matter whom you use, you can use it. So, by the way, hello, my name is Thorben. I'm the general manager of EventMobi. We do event apps, and we have been doing so for 10 years now, and we're still around. And I'm an event planner myself. I actually lived and worked in Edinburgh in Scotland, which is a fantastic place. And I now live in Berlin. And I do event apps. That's what I do. But that's not what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about design and why design matters. So to start off, I would like to answer the question of why we're actually talking about design today. Why does design matter? First of all, I think it's important to understand what design actually is and what design means. And if you don't know how to explain something, or if you have no great idea of how to say something, do the lazy thing. Always start with a quote by Steve Jobs, who said, design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. And I think that's a really important aspect. Design is not only the looks and feels of things, but design is how people use it, what people do with it. One of my favorite examples in everyday life that you can probably observe somewhere near your home, for example near a train station, is that probably at some point some urban designer thought about making a corner. So you have a path and it turns around the corner and you walk on that path. And what you see in reality is that people just make a shortcut through the grass. And that's essentially where design becomes very visible when it's done poorly, because it's, again, not only about what it looks like and what it feels like, but actually how it works. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. The second thing is that design is constantly changing, and design is heavily influenced by trends. I was actually asking myself this morning the question if we as a company knew what we knew today and would have brought out the solution that we have today 10 years ago, would people have gone for it? And I realized that no, probably not, because there's a time for everything, and especially with design, this is true. And while we're sticking with Steve Jobs and Apple, I'm not old enough to remember this anymore, but this is apparently what macOS used to look like in the 1980s. I was born in the 1980s, but that's not what we think about when we think about the way Apple designs things today. So that's one of the first aspects that I want to talk about. Secondly, design shapes user experience, and that's back to the question to why does design matter? There's a quote that I want to read out to you, and I don't know it by heart, so I'm just going to read it off the screen. It's from the designer Dylan Sheffer, who said, "No design is any good unless it fulfills the need of a user. It fills it well." So that really means that whatever you design, it's only designed well if it does exactly what it's supposed to do. And back to the example that I mentioned earlier on, if you have a footpath that goes around a corner, but people just shortcut it, that's simply not well designed. It's well designed if it feels natural to people and if that's the way how people use it. And so I'm going to tie this back to event apps in a minute, because a great design in an event app can make the experience for your attendees much, much better. There's two aspects that I mentioned over and over again, and these do not work independently. They always need to be viewed as together. It's what it looks like and how it works. So these are the two aspects that we're going to focus on. And so let's talk about what event apps should look like. event apps should firstly, when you build them, reflect your brand identity. I think that's something that most event planners have figured out by now, but it's still really important to iterate on that. If you run a corporate event, it should look like the corporate event, or it should look like the company. It should fit in line with whatever you do. And if you don't know, if you're an event planner and you don't necessarily know what your corporate guidelines are, there's probably a document somewhere in your company, in your association, that tells you exactly what things are supposed to look like. Use that document. It's really useful. The second thing it should fit the event's theme and topic. So that starts also with the design of what features you use, for example. You shouldn't necessarily use features that you don't need. You should focus on what do I need and how should I best use it. It should get people excited for the event, and it should make attendees also want to explore the event. So it should have aspects that make attendees curious. One of the things that I noticed that this event here in particular is that they're using 3 different event apps for 3 different purposes at the same time. In my opinion, that's not an ideal use. So one of the things that quite often your supplier will allow you is to integrate solutions into one, and that again is much better designed for your users. I want to show you a few examples in terms of design that I really like. So if you look at those, they're all from different companies, they're all from different places. They're also all built using our platform, but again, you can build this with any platform that you want to. They all have a very distinct branding. For example, this is, I love this so much, it's all yellowish and beautiful. And they are all very clear in what they do and how to use them. And I think that's one of the most important aspects, that it is very simple to understand where you need to go. One example, if you have a trade show, one of the most important things in a trade show is the floor plan, the floor layout, the way things are put, where things are. So if you have a home screen or a start screen, for a trade show, you definitely want to make sure that you put that in the first place people see. If you look at this app, which was an incentive trip, that's not just quite as important. What's really important here is how do I get to the airport and what happens when. And so this is why agenda and hotel and information were put on the home screen. So try to put yourself in the shoes of your attendees and think of what are they looking for. And it really depends on your event what they may be looking for, or what may be important to them. A lot of event app providers also provide you with templates that you can use if you don't have the time to design things, or maybe you are a small association and you actually don't have the funds available to design something. So ask them for maybe if they have branded color or font options. Ask them if for the home screen they may have templates that you can use. Ask them if they can maybe even program some custom design in there. When you talk, for example, about registration, there's a registration company across there, they're called Sura. And one thing they do is they will create a custom template for you that you can always reuse within your registration. And that's really a good practice because it makes sure that your designs are consistent and they are on brand with what you do. And so the same thing also exists for event apps, where event app providers will be happy to design the event app for you. I have a few tips for you that I want to share with you. My first tip is sponsor visibility. One of the great things about event apps, in case you haven't used them before, is that they're really useful to get sponsorship exposure. So you can have sponsor advertising on there, you can have banners on there, you can have sponsor profiles on there. And one of the really cool things that also mobile apps allow for is to have animated advertising. So quite often, a mobile phone screen is pretty small. There's not a lot of space to make a message come through, but you can animate banner ads using usually the popular GIF format, and that allows you to put more information about your sponsors in an advert. The second thing I really like is giving sponsors a face. So if you have an event where your sponsors have staff on site, make sure that their staff is visible. And it goes back to the initial idea of design, that if something is useful, it's probably good design. And if I want to interact with a sponsor at a trade show, I probably want to know whom to look for, or at a conference or any kind of event. And so giving your sponsors a face is probably a really good idea. You can also use very smartly designed gamification to give your sponsors an edge. So this goes a bit far to go into details, but essentially what gamification allows you is to design challenges, and there we are talking about design again, that incentivize your attendees to visit your sponsors. And again, if they are built well, that is going to provide additional revenue for your sponsors. And you can target push notifications. And again, coming back to the theme of design, push notifications quite often have the issue that they don't necessarily apply to everybody. And being able to target them makes a big difference. I was having dinner last night and I took an Uber to somewhere in central London, and 2 minutes before getting off the Uber, I got a push notification from Uber telling me that my drop-off point is next to a cycling lane, and please watch out for bikes when opening the doors. And I just thought, holy shit snacks, that is, by the way, am I allowed to swear? Okay, sorry about that. That is really good design. That is thoughtful. It doesn't make sense for Uber to send a message to all their users, by the way, guys, look out for cyclists when opening the doors, because that's common sense, yet nobody does it. And I say that as somebody that has been doored before. But doing it while you're on your way, 2 minutes before you arrive, and also making sure, already knowing that your stop is just next to a bike lane, and just telling you that very specific information, that is genius. And you can do something similar when using event apps by targeting push notifications to very specific demographics within your event. And that is what I call good design. And obviously having a company section that has the logos of the companies that are exhibiting and so on, that's another great idea. And what all this leads to is avoiding boring logo cemeteries. I'm not sure if you know the expression logo cemetery. That's actually a thing. That's actually what people call it. It's these large pages where you just see dozens of logos, which pretty much every printed program has. And I see some people smiling, so I know you do it. It's not good design. I'm sorry, guys. One of my second tip is, when you're using any kind of maps within your app, there are now a lot of online services that allow you to customize maps. So most of you know Google Maps, and actually you can spot a Google map when you see one, because they all look the same. Google Maps is great, but there's a few really cool services that allow you to build apps that have a bit more of an edge to it. And also that make the information about your event visible much better. So there's, for example, this website. It's literally called snazzymaps.com. That's a well-designed name because it tells you exactly what it does. And they allow you to create maps in your branding. And again, that makes sense for you and your event app to make things consistent, to make things easy on the eye of the event. So how does it work? If you want to design a proper event app. Firstly, event app design should present information clearly. And that's one of the things that sometimes you see with especially music festivals, where artists quite often design the websites. They get lost into doing really, really cool stuff, but actually it becomes really difficult to find the information. And to my point earlier on, design only works if it does what it's supposed to do. And if your event app is supposed to transmit information, that's the first thing you need to make sure. So present the information clearly. What that also implies is, if you're writing texts for your event app, for example, be concise, be short. I know that by now people read novels on their mobile phone, and also my family always sends me text messages that read like a novel, but this is not really how mobile phones are supposed to be used. So try to be concise, try to be short, and present information easy or clearly. Make navigation easy. So again, being able to find your way around event apps is something that needs to be easy. And sometimes you see event planners using event apps, and they have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 levels of navigation. So you have a menu, and you have a sub-menu, you have a sub-menu, and so on. That doesn't make sense. Just make sure that you have 1 level of navigation, and don't put too many items in there. And highlight the most relevant things in one way or another. So for example, if you arrange your menu on your event app, make sure that the things that your attendees are most likely to need are on top. If you have a home screen, as I've shown you earlier on, make sure it has the most relevant information straight at the fingertips of your attendees. And make sure it works on any device. I mean, I've been preaching this for years, and by now it kind of has become the norm, but just make sure that it works on any device, and not only Android and iOS devices, but also make sure people can access it from a laptop. Make sure people can access it from literally any device. If you look at the guys from the live voting system that we're using, also they're distributing free cups over there, if you don't want to waste paper cups. Their platform works on any device, and that's really the way to go, and so should you with event apps. And also, one thing that's really interesting that I want to talk about a bit more in a minute is to adapt to the life cycle of the event. I'm going to tell you a bit more about that in a second, so I'm just going to skip it for now. And finally, also being able to make the whole thing accessible to people with accessibility needs. I'm not sure if you have ever had the amazing fortune of watching a visually impaired person using an iPhone. Who here has seen a blind person or a visually impaired person using an iPhone? It's crazy. Has somebody ever had clicked things on their smartphone and suddenly it started reading out all the text? So sometimes this happens to many of us by accident, but actually the iPhone is one of the devices that has the best screen reading capabilities. So screen reading means that it reads out whatever is on the screen. And a blind person can type on an iPhone. They can use apps on an iPhone pretty much like a person that is not visually impaired can use this. And this is a huge chance for you guys if you're offering solutions like event apps at your event, because suddenly you can bring these people closer to the event. And yes, obviously they're still going to perceive the event differently, but there you have a possibility to use technology in a way that you can make the event more accessible. So make sure that if you're using an event app, it works well with so-called screen readers that exist for iPhone devices, for Android devices, and so on. And if you want to try something fun on the tube tonight when you're on your way home, go into your settings menu, find the accessibility menu, and try to figure out how to work it with your iPhone. It's really fun. It's also really difficult. And if you see somebody that is visually impaired just using it like it's no big deal, that's really, really impressive. And event technology allows you to work around that. So I talked about being contextual with your event app. So what I mean by that is you can change the structure and design of your event app as your event progresses. So let's talk about the home screen, for example, which most event apps have, which is the place that people first come to when they access the app. So before the event, this home screen, which we designed as an example, has the agenda, it has maps of how to find the venue, it has the attendees on there, and it has hotel information on there. So these are kind of the things, if you think about it, that most of the attendees will need before the event. So if I'm accessing the app before the event, this is the information I need readily available straight at my fingertips. What's more is that this event app is using an event game to get people more excited for the event, so they also put that on the home screen. So that means every time somebody accesses the event app before the event, they will see the information they need straight away. Now, if we're talking during the event, we may change this. So we still keep the agenda on there because that's the most important part for pretty much any event. But then we also add maps about the show floor. You don't necessarily need to know what a show floor looks like before the event, but if you're at the event, this becomes really important. But then also adding things like event information. So where's the smoking area, where are the washrooms? These things, again, not really important before the event, super important during the event. And obviously the Wi-Fi information, which is something that, I don't know, I have not seen an event where they managed to communicate Wi-Fi information clearly, but putting it on the home screen of your event app is pretty much making it as easy as possible. Actually, EventTech Live is doing it really well also by putting it on the badge, just on a side note. And then after the event, again, you can extend your event app lifecycle by adding relevant information to your home screen after the event, like polls and feedback, so you can ask people how they like the event, documents, so you can have all the presentations on your home screen, attendees and companies, so you can follow up with the people and also see the event pictures after the event. And also, if you use something like group discussions, they can live on after the event. Now, all the elements I've shown you, they can totally reside in the main menu of your event app all the time, and that's fine, and that's not a problem. But just by changing your home screen before, during, and after the event to make the most important things even more easily accessible to your attendees, that's what we mean by good design. It's really thinking from the perspective of your attendees, and it's making things easier for your attendees to enjoy and to have fun at the event. So, because we know that this is all a big world and there's many, many good examples, we actually went ahead and created a website called besteventapps.com, which has a collection of event apps, and not only those that we made, but actually all of the event apps that we could find that are really, really well made. We actually kind of stole the idea from these guys. They have a website called kickassregistrationsites.com, and they also have beautiful examples. I'm going to send the link around later on. Also, if you leave your business card with me or my colleague Lisa, who's going to stand at the exit and who's waving at you right now, I can send you the slides if you have any questions. Speaking of questions, let's look at the questions. So, the first question I see here is, what consideration do you make for the various devices and screen sizes that people use? As an example, the iPhone 5 screen is really small compared to the S10 Plus, for example. Yes, that's true. And actually, it's becoming worse over time. Back when the iPhone came out, there was just one iPhone size, and then suddenly there was a second iPhone size, and now I don't know how many sizes iPhones come in, and it's the same and actually worse with Android devices. Samsung is finally launching their foldable phone, so you can unfold it and it's just ginormous. Essentially what I would look at is at any given point you can get online stats of what screen sizes are the most common, and make sure that you cater to 80% of those. But also make sure it still works on the remaining 20%. But always make sure it works on any screen size of any modern phone. On that example, however, I will also say that the iPhone 5 by now doesn't receive updates anymore. I think it has been pretty much shifted out by Apple as a phone that they are supporting. And also that's a tough decision that sometimes you have to make, that you cannot support very old devices anymore. And sometimes that's one of the things that you have to do in order to keep things working. Do you keep accessibility in mind when designing apps, and do you have to keep accessibility in mind when designing apps and events? Do I have to? Well, that foremost relates to my organizational rules or maybe the local laws. So when we, for example, work with organizations like the United Nations, we totally have to do that. Other small companies probably not. The question is, should you? And I believe, yes, you should definitely. And it's not necessarily always about doing things perfectly, because making a piece of software, a website, an app, perfectly accessible for everybody is really, really, really hard. And yes, that would be ideal, but you can't always make it happen. But if you can at least make it accessible well enough, that would be great. When you mention people with disabilities and screen readers, what about colors? Are those considered? That's an interesting question. So you know that there's different kinds of visual impairment. It's not only that you cannot see well, but sometimes people also see and perceive colors differently. And so some people may need specific colors. Ideally, if you have brand guidelines for your company, they already have been designed in mind and being aware that people see colors differently. And so if you apply the brand guidelines, you should be fine. However, if you don't have brand guidelines, you should make sure that fonts are well legible. One last thing though about that is also that many phones actually have, again, accessibility options to put the contrast higher. So even if you don't pay attention to designing the color scheme right, most phones now have facilities that kind of fix the mistakes that you made, if I may say that. Are there any color faux pas to avoid? I think that relates to my earlier point that I made. Design is a lot influenced by trends. And if you look at some of the things that, in terms of colors, are out and about right now, that would have been impossible 5 years ago. So other than making sure that the contrast is so that you can read well, I'm not sure if there are any color faux pas. One of the things I recently started doing a lot with the apps that we do is design them in a darker way, because a lot of modern phone screens actually use less energy if the screen is darker. But other than that, I don't have a good question for that. So with that, thank you very much for all the questions. If you leave your, can I just have my screen back, the other one? If you leave your business card here, I'm also going to send you an ebook on how to customize event apps. It's 30 pages long. It works for any event app supplier, so you don't have to buy from us. Obviously, if you want to buy from us, we're over there. We're amazing. EventMobi is the name of the company. But if you want just a few general good tips, you can get the ebook by giving me or Lisa, who's again waving at you, the business card. I'm thanking you so much for being here and sticking around. I know how draining it can be to sit on a stage when everybody around is talking to you. Nobody fell asleep. There's only one person that ran away. You've been a great audience. I hope you enjoy your day in London. Thank you very much for being here and have a great day. Thank you.